Hey everyone, welcome to the deep dive. We're going to be exploring some really cool stuff today in the world of behavioral economics, kind of looking at all those weird little ways that our brains work, and how that affects the choices we make in our lives. And we're going to be using the book Predictably Irrational as a jumping off point today. But don't worry, we're not just going to recap the book. We're going to use it to springboard into some deeper discussions and really get you thinking about how these concepts play out in the real world.
Exactly. We really want to explore those aha moments where you're suddenly like, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way
I
before.
love those moments.
Yes. We'll be tackling some questions like, why do we make decisions that seem totally logical when you really think about it? And how do companies use these like sneaky little tactics to kind of nudge us toward buying their products? And most importantly, like how can we become aware of these patterns, and start making choices that are truly in our best interests?
All right, so let's dive right into an example. Okay. Imagine you're shopping for a new TV, one of those giant flat screens, and you've narrowed it down to two options that you really like.
Okay, I'm with you.
But then you see a third TV, right?
Mm.
And it's similar to the other two, but maybe not quite as good, and it's definitely more expensive.
Ah, this is where things get interesting.
Okay, lay it on me.
So the presence of this third option, right, this less desirable option, which we call the decoy, actually can influence you to choose one of the original two TVs, even if it wasn't your initial favorite.
Really? So just adding another option changes our perception of value.
Exactly. It's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, how does that even work?
Well, it taps into this need we have for comparison. Our brains aren't really good at evaluating things in isolation, so we need a reference point. So this decoy gives us that reference point, and it makes one of the other TVs seem like a way better deal.
So it's all about like framing the choice. I bet companies use this all the time.
Oh, they totally do. A classic example is that marketing campaign The Economist ran a while back.
Okay, I think I've heard of this one.
Yeah, they offered 3 subscription options online only, which was the cheapest, then print only, which was more expensive. And then they had a combined online and print subscription for the same price as the print only option.
So why would anyone choose print only when you could get both for the same price?
Exactly. That print only option was a decoy. It was there to steer people towards the combined subscription.
Wow, that's so sneaky.
I know, right? And you start to see decoys everywhere once you know what to look for.
Yeah, I bet. And I'm guessing this principle applies to way more than just buying TVs or magazines, right?
Absolutely. It affects how we perceive attractiveness, job satisfaction, even who we choose to date. It all comes down to this cognitive bias called anchoring.
Anchoring. Okay.
So anchoring is kind of like a mental shortcut. Our brains latch onto the first piece of information we encounter, and that becomes our anchor. And then all our subsequent judgments and decisions are influenced by that initial reference point, even if it was totally random.
So the first thing we see or hear basically sets the stage for how we evaluate everything else. That's kind of wild.
It really is. It's amazing how much we operate on autopilot without even realizing it.
Right, it's like our subconscious minds are making all these decisions for us.
Exactly. And that leads us to another fascinating aspect of human behavior, the irresistible power of the word free.
Oh yeah, free stuff. Who doesn't love free stuff? It's like it just makes everything better. It's almost like magic, right?
Right. But there's actually a psychological reason behind that. It's called the zero price effect.
Okay, tell me more about the zero price effect.
So the emotional pull of something being free is so strong that it can override our rational decision-making processes. Our brains light up when we see the word free because it signals a potential gain without any loss. It's like a primal instinct.
Okay, I can definitely relate to that. I mean, have you ever grabbed something just because it was free even though you didn't really need it?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah, me too. It's like we can't resist a good deal even if it's not really a good deal.
Exactly. And there have been so many studies that prove this. One study offered people a choice between a really delicious high quality chocolate truffle and a cheaper, less desirable chocolate.
I see where this is going.
When the truffle was priced even just slightly and the cheap chocolate was free, guess which one people chose?
They went for the free chocolate, didn't they?
Yep. Most people chose the free chocolate even though it wasn't as good. The allure of getting something for nothing was just too powerful to resist.
So even a tiny price compared to free can make a huge difference in our behavior.
It really can. It's like our brains just get fixated on that zero and everything else goes out the window.
This is making me think of all those buy one, get one free deals.
Mm.
Are those really a good deal or are we just falling for the zero price effect?
That's a great question, and it's something we should all be asking ourselves when we see those deals. Are we actually buying something we need and will use, or are we just reacting to that freebie? Remember, businesses are well aware of these psychological quirks, and they use them to influence our choices.
That's a good point. So it's like we need to be more aware of these tactics and make sure we're not just being manipulated.
Exactly. We need to make conscious choices that align with our own values and goals, and not just react to these like subconscious triggers.
That's a great reminder. I think we all need to be more mindful of these subtle influences and how they can affect our decisions.
Absolutely. It's all about becoming more aware of our own biases and making more intentional choices.
All right, so we've talked about how external factors like pricing and marketing tactics can influence us.
Yeah.
But what about the unspoken rules we live by, those social norms? How do they play into our decision making?
That's a fantastic question, and it leads us into a really fascinating area of behavioral economics. We'll be diving into that in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned. So we were just talking about social norms, right? Those unspoken rules that kind of guide how we behave in relationships.
Right, it's like that unwritten code of conduct.
Exactly, and it's all based on trust and reciprocity, like that sense of we're all in this together. We do things for each other out of kindness, not because we expect to get paid.
Yeah, like helping a friend move or volunteering in your community.
Exactly. It's just that natural human impulse to be helpful.
Okay, and then you mentioned market norms, right?
Yeah.
Which are kind of the opposite.
Yeah. Market norms are all about transactions. Clear expectations of getting something in return for your effort or your money. It's much more like a business transaction.
Okay, so we've got social norms, which are all about warm and fuzzy feelings, and then market norms, which are more about cold hard cash.
Exactly. And it's fascinating what happens when these two worlds collide.
Oh, I bet. So what happens when we try to mix social norms and market norms?
Well, let's just say it can get kind of messy. It can lead to some pretty unexpected and often undesirable consequences.
Okay, you got to give me an example. I love a good story.
Okay, so there was this study where they asked people to do this really simple task, like dragging circles across a computer screen.
Sounds riveting.
I know, right? But here's the thing. Some people were paid a decent amount for doing it. Others were paid a tiny amount. And then some weren't paid at all.
Okay, I'm curious to see where this is going.
So what they found was that the people who worked for free, driven by those social norms, they actually put in more effort than the people who got paid a small amount.
Really? That's so counterintuitive. You'd think the people getting paid would work harder.
Right. But it shows how fragile social norms are. Even a small financial incentive can undermine that intrinsic motivation that comes from doing something out of kindness or a sense of obligation.
So it's almost like offering a small payment is like an insult. It cheapens the act of helping.
Yeah, it can definitely be perceived that way.
Yeah.
It shifts that dynamic from a gesture of goodwill to a cold transaction. And it diminishes that sense of shared purpose and connection.
This reminds me of that story about the daycare center that was having problems with parents picking up their kids late. So they decided to implement a fine for late pickups, thinking that would motivate people to be on time.
Oh, yeah. What happened with that?
Well, the fines actually backfired. Late pickups actually increased because the fine shifted the whole dynamic. It became a market norm. Parents could just buy the right to be late.
That's a classic example of how mixing those two norms can have unintended consequences.
Right. And the worst part was, even when they got rid of the fines, the late pickups continued.
Exactly. It's really hard to go back once those social norms have been eroded.
So the lesson here is be careful about mixing social norms and market norms.
Absolutely. We need to be mindful of the delicate balance between those two worlds.
This is giving me so much to think about. It's there's this whole other layer of social dynamics that we're not even aware of.
It really is. And it all ties into this bigger question of, what motivates us? And how do we make decisions in a world that's constantly trying to influence us?
Right. And speaking of influence, we haven't even touched on the topic of honesty yet. How honest are we really? And what factors can influence our ethical choices?
Ooh, that's a juicy one. We'll be diving into that in the next part of our deep dive. So we're going to get into honesty now, huh? This is where it gets real.
Yeah, I mean, we like to think of ourselves as honest people, right? But are we always as honest as we think we are? It makes you wonder,
That's a question a lot of us try to avoid, right? But it's crucial to understanding our own behavior. We might have this ideal image of ourselves as always being truthful and ethical. But behavioral economics suggests that our choices, especially when it comes to honesty, can be swayed by things we don't even realize.
All right, I'm all ears. What kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, one factor is the way we perceive money. For example, imagine this. Would you be more likely to steal a dollar bill or a can of Coke worth $1 from like a shared office fridge?
Hmm, that's a good question. I mean, logically, it's the same value, right? But I think I'd feel less guilty taking the Coke. It just doesn't feel as serious.
You've hit on a key point there. We tend to be more dishonest when the reward is less tangible, further removed from actual money. There's this like psychological distance that makes it easier to rationalize our behavior.
So it's like our brains kind of create this separation between the actual value and the object itself. Like a can of Coke feels less significant than a dollar bill, even though they're worth the same amount.
Exactly. And there's research to back this up. In one study, they gave people the opportunity to cheat on a task, and the reward was either cash or tokens that could be exchanged for cash later.
Okay, I'm sensing a pattern here. Did the people who got tokens cheat more?
You got it. Those who were cheating for tokens were way more dishonest. It's like that extra step of having to convert the tokens into cash created enough psychological distance for them to loosen their moral compass.
That's wild. And it makes you think about all those little things we do sometimes that might be ethically questionable, like borrowing office supplies or exaggerating on expense reports. Those things don't feel as bad because it's not like we're stealing actual money.
Yeah. Right. It's that slippery slope. And it highlights how susceptible we are to these subtle psychological influences. We might not even see ourselves as being dishonest, but our behavior can be swayed by these factors that we're not even aware of.
So what can we do about it? It kind of feels like we're at the mercy of our own brains.
Well, awareness is a big first step, just recognizing that we're more prone to these ethical lapses when rewards are less tangible can help us make more conscious choices. Like asking yourself, would I still do this if it was about cold, hard cash?
Yeah, that's a good reality check. It forces you to think about your true motivations.
Right, and that's the whole point of understanding behavioral economics. It's not about beating ourselves up over our flaws or anything. It's about gaining insights into these predictable patterns so we can become more mindful and make more intentional choices.
I love that. It's like we're giving ourselves the tools to outsmart our own brains.
Exactly. It's all about empowerment.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. I feel like we've uncovered so many fascinating insights about human behavior.
It's been a really fun conversation.
It really has.
Mm.
We've talked about everything from the power of relativity to the allure of free stuff to the complexities of honesty. And it's all connected to this idea of predictable irrationality. Like, we're not always as rational as we think we are. But that doesn't mean we're doomed to make bad decisions.
Right. It's about understanding these patterns and using that knowledge to make penny choices.
Exactly. And hopefully our listeners are walking away with a new perspective on their own behavior and the behavior of others.
Mm.
We're all predictably irrational in some ways, but that's what makes us human.
Totally. It's those quirks and imperfections that make life interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. We want to thank you all for joining us today and for being part of this conversation.
Thanks, everyone. We hope you enjoyed it.
And remember, keep those brains of yours engaged. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep questioning the world around you.
Until next time.